Hey everyone, welcome back to Storytime 59. Just a reminder that this is part B in my reflection series on my college experience. If y'all did not see part A, I highly recommend watching it first before watching this part so that y'all won't be completely confused. Thank y'all and enjoy the story time. So now that I've discussed my classes, campus involvement, and experience living on campus, I figured that I would dedicate this next part of the story time to funny and crazy stories from my time at UNC Charlotte. If you've been to college or know someone who went to college, they'll definitely have at least one of these stories to tell. In my case, I have an absolute ton of stories to tell from all 5 semesters at UNC Charlotte that I'd love to tell. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. So how these stories work is that I'll be telling them in chronological order. I'll start by discussing stories from my first semester, and then second, and so on. Before each semester, I'll give a brief overview of all the stories I'll be telling, as well as how many. So with that, let's talk about my first semester, spring 2022. This semester definitely had a multitude of funny, crazy, and even scary stories, as it was definitely a very eventful semester with a lot happening. I'll be telling a total of 5 stories for the story time. The first of which took place on Tuesday, January 18th. During this time, all classes met on Zoom in wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Anyways, this happened during geology. It was our 3rd class of the semester, and we were still being introduced to the class and stuff. Someone in the class made a Discord server for the class, so we could go there to chat about assignments and other stuff. However, the group chat would start to blow up when me and many other students noticed a particular student with her webcam on hitting her vape. Now, hitting a vape is nothing unusual, as many people vape. I personally don't, but I know many others do. But to hit a vape on a Zoom class was definitely unusual, especially with her webcam on, so you can expect a lot of people went on the Discord to talk about it and joke around with it. However, nothing would have prepared us for what she did next. If hitting her vape on the Zoom wasn't bad enough, she then proceeded to pick up her gun and then clean the Glock right on camera. I immediately pulled up the video camera on my phone and recorded her doing that. And then the Discord went absolutely wild with people asking each other if they saw her clean her gun, and I even sent the video to the chat. But a few seconds after putting her gun down, the woman noticed that her webcam was on, to which she immediately left the Zoom call, all while our professor continued teaching and we were all wondering if he even noticed. Ultimately, he would address the class about it at the end of the class and file an incident report and encourage us all to do the same. So we did. That woman was expelled, and due to safety concerns, we had to stay online for 2 more weeks. Then once we returned to class, the Dean of Safety visited and thanked us for doing the right thing and also talked a little bit about safety. And then afterwards, the class was pretty normal. Pretty crazy way to start the class, but at least it made it a little more memorable. Had this incident not happened, I'd probably not remember one thing from geology. But the drama didn't just stay in geology. The video I recorded of the woman cleaning her Glock actually went viral across the school, even being posted by 49ers Chicks, the most popular unofficial UNC Charlotte Instagram account. In fact, during the 2021 to 2022 year in review, the Niner Times, our college newspaper, even did a little segment about it when talking about the school year, so it was a pretty crazy ordeal. However, it also sparked a controversy because some people claimed that this woman wasn't doing anything wrong since she was in her home and not in the classroom. While this is a valid argument, the issue is that online Zoom classes are treated like actual classes, meaning you should maintain the same behaviors that you would in an in-person classroom. Therefore, this woman cleaning her gun on camera would be the same as her bringing it on campus property, where firearms are prohibited. This was the explanation provided by the Dean of Student Safety, and I fully agree with this explanation and fully support this woman's expulsion. The next story I'm going to tell involves my roommate. Now, as said before, he was a crackhead. He was also very dirty and never cleaned for the life of him. However, this story doesn't revolve around his weed or his disgusting living habits, but rather something really stupid he did. So this happened on Saturday, February 12th. It was a peaceful and pretty warm day. I was inside playing video games while my roommate was in the living room, where he got hungry and wanted to eat an Uncrustable. Now, if you've ever had an Uncrustable, you know that in order to eat one, you have to thaw it out. But I guess my roommate didn't read the packaging that said not to microwave the sandwich, as he did just that. and just to make things worse, he put it on for a whole 3 minutes. This went about as good as you'd expect. As about a minute into heating, the sandwich exploded in the microwave and smoke emerged, reaching the fire alarm and setting it off in our room. It only affected our room because in order for the fire alarms to set off, they have to reach more than one alarm or be set off manually. So me and my suite mates left the room while a roommate stayed and met with the officer who came by to turn it off. Thankfully, the microwave was not destroyed, and after cleaning up the microwave, it was all good. Still funny to think that he thought it was a good idea to put an Uncrustable in the microwave, especially since the packaging makes it very clear not to put it in the microwave. Now, the next story I want to discuss is a rather adorable one about a romantic interest. So around late February, I started to develop some feelings for this really cute girl who sat in front of me in Western history. In mid-March, I'd start talking to her after class, where I'd walk her over to the library where we would depart. Every time I talked to her, I got pretty excited since of course she was really cute. Now, the day I started talking to her, that class was pretty rough. The reason is because in class, our professor went on another political rant like he often did. Just that at the beginning of class, he had us do a poll everywhere question where we had to select whether we align more with liberal or conservative ideology. Already that's a red flag, especially since there wasn't any neutral option. Therefore, I selected one of the options only since that was how he was taking attendance. But once it was done, the results came up and he was quite furious because the majority of students said they align more with conservative ideology. This also surprised me some since colleges have a tendency to be very liberal places, although UNC Charlotte is definitely a lot more conservative compared to other colleges, so I guess I can see why. But anyways, our professor freaked the fuck out that over half of the class chose conservative since according to him, anyone not liberal was an evil racist and fascist pig who wants to control women's bodies and kill gay people. Just completely ridiculous statements that proves that our professor spends way too much time on BuzzFeed or some other extremist left-wing website. However, that's when he did by far the most dickhead thing he could have done. He called on a student and asked them about their political views. The student he called on was my crush. Now, she was like me, as she was also neutral on most political issues, so she randomly selected one. So that's what she said, but that's when our professor ridiculed her for not wanting to be involved in politics and talked about how not being involved in politics will destroy the nation and stuff. Again, just him being absolutely unbearable to be around. Now, going back to talking with my crush, the reason I bring this incident up is because starting that day, I talked to her some more. The first day we talked, I gave her some assurance that she did nothing wrong and our professor was an asshole. And then for the rest of the semester, we'd become friends and talk after class and stuff. Because of her, I'd start to enjoy going to class. As terrible as our professor was, it gave me the opportunity to see my crush. That then brings me to Wednesday, May 4th. So this was reading day. Since the UCAE was holding a reading day session for business calc, I attended it. Funny to look back on it, especially since I'd go on to lead the reading day session for this class myself at the end of the fall 2023 semester. But anyways, I bring this up because about halfway through the session, I got a GroupMe text from my crush, and it was probably the best message I could have gotten. It said, "Call me," and then she gave her phone number. Immediately, I was in awe because my crush gave me her number without me even asking. So I left the session and called her, where we talked for a whole hour. The first 30 minutes were about the class, while the rest of the time we talked about other stuff. The whole time, I was just so happy to be talking to her. Every time I talked to her, I felt like I was in paradise, as just hearing her voice calmed me so much. We'd ultimately call each other for a few more days until the end of the semester, where we unfortunately drifted away. Additionally, after my sister found her Instagram, I would discover that she had a boyfriend, meaning dating her would not be possible. But nonetheless, I still tend to get pretty happy looking back on her and all my memories with her, as she was a really nice and very cute girl, and I hope she's doing well. The next story I want to discuss took place in April. So in April, we had our room inspections, where the RAs would come into our rooms and inspect them, make sure we didn't have any contraband, and to make sure our rooms were clean. They do these once a semester, although they did not do one during the spring 2024 semester, since I think our RAs forgot to do them. Anyways, me, my roommate, and my suite mates got the room cleaned as well as we could. And yes, my roommate did clean up all that shit he had on his side of the room. Believe me, if you saw a side-by-side picture of his side of the room before and after cleaning, you'd think that they were two different rooms, especially since his side of the room looked like something you'd see on Hoarders. But we cleaned the room very well, and once finished, it looked incredibly well. However, we'd ultimately fail a room inspection, and it would be for literally the pettiest and smallest thing that literally doesn't matter at all. We failed because our shower curtains had mildew on them, as there were really small pink spots on the curtains. And the worst part was that it wasn't even our fault, as the curtains were literally older than all four of us. In that case, housing should get the failed room inspection, not us, since they're the ones responsible for purchasing shower curtains and stuff. So we failed room inspections because housing couldn't purchase new ones. That meant that we would have another room inspection a few days later, where if we failed this one, me and my roommates would be charged $20 each. Thankfully, we learned that we could get rid of the mildew by putting the shower curtains in the washing machine. So we did that and it got rid of the mildew, allowing us to pass our second inspection. But still, it's absolutely ridiculous for us to fail room inspections for something that isn't our fault at all and is also super minor. The last story I want to talk about for the spring 2022 semester takes us to the beginning of May. So at CBF, I made friends with a guy named Drew. Drew also happened to be taking business calc. So throughout the second half of the first semester, we would often hang out in the library to study together. Now, on one particular night, where we were going over definite integrals, I already did the Hawks assignment, so I was just simply helping Drew review the assignment. However, that's when an idea came to my mind. What if definite integrals could be done on a calculator? So I did some research and sure enough, I managed to find a calculator shortcut for definite integrals. I then showed Drew and as a result, he was able to do the entire assignment in just 5 minutes. Immediately after answering the second problem correctly, we both started freaking out and going absolutely crazy, as this was supposed to be the hardest lesson in the entire class and we just found a way to make it the easiest. Thankfully, there weren't too many people, as it was around midnight, but we did make enough noise for a librarian to come over. Instead of telling us to be quiet, she actually chimed in and we told her what we were doing and stuff, and we even showed her the calculator shortcut. Overall, we had a fun night, especially since we were literally made the hardest topic in the hardest pre-business class practically free. I was also kind of upset because I had already done the assignment, but I at least got to use the shortcut on the last exam and on the final, so that was good at least. And then I also got to show it to 2Ds when I started tutoring the following spring, but I'll still always remember this night just because of how loud me and Drew got in a place you shouldn't even talk in a normal voice, much less yelling. So that wraps up all the stories I want to discuss for the spring 2022 semester. The next 6 stories I'll be telling y'all come from the fall 2022 semester. Like the spring 2022 semester, there were quite a lot of funny and crazy stuff that happened this semester, and that I figured that I might as well share with y'all. For the first of these stories though, I'm going to give a viewer discretion warning. This story is very not safe for work and is also probably the weirdest story I'll be telling, so you've been warned. So, this happened sometime in mid-September. I was walking back to my dorm from Social 704 by crossing the Union Bridge. That's when I noticed a huge crowd of people huddling to the left of the bridge, looking towards a tree. Some even had their phones recording. Of course, this means something's going on, so I decided to ask someone what was up. He then pointed towards the tree and said, "Them two are fucking." I then looked up at the tree he was pointing at, and long and behold, there were 2 raccoons having sex. While this didn't nearly interest me as it did everyone else, I was still quite amused when I looked up and saw the raccoons. I didn't record them or anything, I just said what the fuck and then went about my day. Still might be the weirdest thing I've ever came across while walking around campus, so I haven't forgotten about it. The next story I want to tell y'all takes us to a particular customer I worked with while working at the bookstore. So how bookstore policy worked is that whenever the phone rang, us employees had to go over and answer the phone and try to help the customer as best as we could. Honestly, not the best policy in my opinion, as while it did provide a resume builder for communication and problem-solving skills, the vast majority of issues customers were having were things either I didn't know about or tasks that should be taken care of by a manager. Now, that unfortunately was most phone calls. When not those cases, I was able to help customers, so that was nice. But then there were a few calls where I worked with some, let's just say, interesting people. And by interesting people, I worked with some incredibly stupid people. Like, I'm not talking about people who are so stupid, I'm talking about people who are so stupid that I don't even know how they can be that dumb. A particular case of this involved a woman who called us asking where the bookstore was. I told her that we were located in the student union on the first floor beside the Starbucks. She then thanked me and hung up. But then a few minutes later, I got yet another phone call from her asking where we were. I then explained the same directions to her, where she thanked me and hung up. But then a few minutes later, she called again asking where we were. At this point, I was frustrated because the bookstore is extremely difficult to miss, as it's literally right in front of the stairs in the student union. So I tried to be even more specific, and even then she could not find us. Eventually, she got frustrated too, so she asked to see my manager, and even my manager couldn't help her out. Ultimately, she gave up, and me and my manager laughed at how unbelievably dumb she was. Like, I literally gave the most specific and easiest directions to follow, and she still didn't understand. Like, the Starbucks in the student union is between the student union entrance and the bookstore, so the bookstore's location was literally very obvious, if it being the first thing you see in the union wasn't obvious enough. No idea how she couldn't find us. Anyways, the next story I want to tell y'all is one of my personal favorites. It happened in October. Anyways, I was walking down Craver Road after getting out of statistics. Craver Road is the busiest road on UNC Charlotte's campus, as it's where the student union, UREC, and the courtyard are, all of which tend to be among the first places I think of when I think of UNC Charlotte's campus. Anyways, while walking down, I spotted something really funny. That being someone in a cow costume riding a unicycle down the road. The fact that he was riding a unicycle in of itself was interesting enough, as you don't see someone riding one every day. But this guy was also dressed up in a cow costume, which made it really funny. I'm not too sure if he was doing an event with the Chick-fil-A on campus or what, but I definitely got a good laugh from that. But the best part is that wouldn't be the only day I'd see this guy, as that night, I would spot him again in his cow costume at UREC. I was at the top floor on a treadmill overlooking the basketball court. About 5 minutes into my run, I saw that same guy in his cow costume on the court playing some basketball. And the best part is that he was dominating too, scoring a ton of shots and blocking a ton of shots too. Needless to say that it was extremely amusing watching a dude in a cow costume wreck a bunch of people in basketball. The next story I'm going to tell y'all is, while one of the most adorable stories I'll be telling y'all, it unfortunately has a sad ending. This story deals with another romantic interest, just that I'd go a lot further with her than my romantic interest back from the spring 2022 semester. Anyways, the story begins in September of 2022 at a recruiting event called Meet the Professionals. Meet the Professionals is an accounting recruiting event hosted by Beta Alpha Psi every fall, where a multitude of accounting firms come to campus, introduce themselves to us, and provide us the opportunity to network and even hand in resumes. The firms range from small accounting firms local to Charlotte to the Big Four. I'd attend Meet the Professionals in both the fall 2022 and fall 2023 semesters, and it would also be the event where I met the company I'll be working for later this year. Anyways, it was at this recruiting event where I met this really cute girl. She was a redhead and a little shy, but she was still really adorable. But even better than looks, we shared a ton in common. For one, we were both accounting majors and economics minors, so we were both studying the exact same things. Second, we happened to share Intermediate Accounting 1 together, and after this event, she would start sitting with me, which I'll get to more later. Third, she was big into video games, which while I've definitely lost my interest in gaming as I've gotten older, I could still relate just because of how much time I spent playing video games when I was younger. We also had so much other stuff in common that we really didn't have a lot of differences besides age, since she was 21 while I was 18. Anyways, Meet the Professionals took place on 2 Wednesdays and 2 Thursdays. We met on the first Thursday. She talked to me first, and things started from there. We'd talk in between rotations and would walk together with recruiters and employees, basically helping each other out. In fact, on the last day of Meet the Professionals, she was being picked up by her dad for the weekend. Since it was around 9 p.m. and dark outside, I waited with her until her dad arrived, since that's what a good man should do. Anyways, we would continue talking even after Meet the Professionals. Starting the class after our last day of Meet the Professionals, she would begin sitting beside me in Intermediate Accounting 1. I would also start walking her to her next class, which she had directly after intermediate accounting. We would also start eating lunch occasionally outside of class, whether it be Chick-fil-A, Panda Express, or wherever we wanted. I'd pay for her meal since I was the only one taking her out, although she'd often hesitate about that and often to offer to pay for my meal. But I mean, that's what a man's supposed to do, so I know I did the right thing. But over time, I'd begin to develop some serious feelings for her. By the end of the month, I would develop huge romantic interest for her and think about her almost all the time. From her adorable personality to her interest to her absolutely gorgeous hair, I could not get over her. Therefore, in October, I decided that I was going to build the courage to confess to her. So that's what I did on Thursday, October 20th. After class, while walking her to her next class, I pulled her to the side and told her how I felt. I didn't do anything cheesy, I just told her straight up that I liked her and asked her out on a date. She was quite stunned, but not too surprised given how well I treated her over the past month, but she ultimately said yes. I already had date plans, so I told her about my ideas, which she was more than thrilled about. We then hugged for the first time, and I then walked her to class, and afterwards, I took the walk of victory back to my room. As you might expect, I was extremely happy about this. Like, I'm not kidding when I say that I wanted to scream so badly when she said yes. Throughout the year, I had been beating myself up over never having a girlfriend or even never having been on a date at 18 years old. In fact, I even struggled to fall asleep the night before, as I was so scared about asking her out and even thought the world would end if she said no. But when she said yes, I felt a massive weight fall off my shoulders. For the rest of the day, I would be in an incredibly happy and energetic mood. In fact, that day at work, I was stocking books at double the speed I usually stock them because I was just so happy and energetic that day. As a result, October 20th would go on to be the second best day of 2022 for me, as well as the best day of the fall 2022 semester, with June 21st being the best day of the year for me since I had a fantastic 18th birthday. Anyways, my overall happiness pretty much skyrocketed for the second half of October. I continued talking to her and stuff, but from then until the date, I was in a fantastic mood. That then brings me to our date, which took place the night of Friday, November 4th. We went to a corn maze near where she lives. Her parents drove her there while I drove myself. Honestly, there isn't a whole lot to talk about with regards to the date, but pretty much what happened was that for the first half of our time together, we went through the actual corn maze and did the trivia and stuff. Then the second half, we spent some time playing farm games over at the barn and petting the animals at the petting zoo. Overall, I had an absolute blast, and I feel like she somewhat enjoyed herself too, as I saw her smiling, laughing, and having a good time. However, I made a big mistake about 3/4 through. While I thought that this was a great moment back in Storytime 47, looking back on this a year and a half later, I think I did something I absolutely should not have done that I think ultimately cost me my relationship with her, and that was to hold hands with her. So around 3/4 of the way through, we were just talking about the farm. Suddenly, I noticed that our hands were pretty close while walking, which reminded me of one of my goals for this date, which was to hold hands with her. So, after a little bit of hyping myself up, I asked her if she wanted to hold hands. She said yes, and we held hands, which felt absolutely amazing. A woman's touch is one of the greatest feelings in the world, especially if she's really cute, with this girl being very adorable. So it felt amazing, and even now, I still get quite excited thinking about this moment, since this is literally as far as I've gotten with a girl. However, as much as I enjoyed this short moment for how romantic it was, I don't think she enjoyed it very much herself. And I noticed this because about 2 minutes later, she had to go to the bathroom, so she went away while I waited for her. Ended up waiting 15 minutes, which I think is likely because she really didn't want to hold hands with me. Which, I get it, that's completely okay, and honestly, I wish she would have just refused to hold my hand since I would have understood, as I never want to push anything on anyone. Although at the time, this didn't come up as a red flag, so I still didn't think much about it until a year later when I finally realized what likely occurred. It also backs my case that she mentioned that her parents would arrive 30 minutes later, so that too kind of makes me think that I probably should not have asked her out. But the rest of the night went pretty well. We played a few more games until her parents came and picked her up, and afterwards, it was over. I had a pretty successful first ever date, and even though I made the mistake of holding her hand, I still think I had a good night. However, after our date, our relationship would unfortunately begin to crumble. I noticed that she would begin to increase her response time to my texts and also sometimes say that she was too busy to be walked to her next class. She also rejected my invitation to my sister's 16th birthday, where we went to Topgolf and ate at Texas Roadhouse in Concord. These hit me as red flags, and after consulting my sister about this, she confirmed that this is likely an issue. As a result, I ended up returning to my super anxious and even somewhat depressed mental well-being, as I worried about her a lot. Ultimately, my concerns would be true, as on Thursday, December 1st, I decided to ask her out again, where this time she rejected me. While I completely understood and respected her decision, I ended up having a mental breakdown that night and had one of my worst episodes since my suicide attempt back in 8th grade. I felt that I was a failure to not just her, but to everyone I knew and everyone who supported me. I felt that I'd let not only myself down, but everyone else too, since everyone was rooting for me with her. I even felt like I was even a mistake and that everyone hates me because I was a useless piece of shit to society. It was the same thoughts I had about myself back when I was in 8th grade. I ended up crying myself to sleep that night, but I still woke up and ended up feeling a whole lot better the next day. While I was still very upset about the rejection, I didn't feel as bad and kind of accepted that it did happen, although I still beat myself up for it. It wouldn't be until midway through the spring 2023 semester when I finally knocked some sense into myself. After getting over the heartbreak and also started watching anime again, I'd pretty much get over this whole situation, especially after watching ReZero and seeing Rim get rejected. Mind you, Rim was literally voted the cutest anime girl of all time a few years back, and she's also my anime crush. So if she gets rejected by her crush, anyone could get rejected, which really hit me hard when I saw that episode, alongside being the episode that made ReZero my all-time favorite anime. Therefore, I decided that from that moment forward, I was going to keep going. I was going to leave my rejection in the past, as I needed to keep going to focus on the things that were really important. As a result, I not only stopped feeling bad about myself, but I'd also stopped looking for a girlfriend and instead simply focused on myself. I would also stop getting jealous of couples walking around on campus, allowing me to appreciate others and celebrate with them. And because of this, I was able to be much more mentally stable during the fall 2023 and spring 2024 semesters. And even though I've now graduated college and will be turning 20 years old in a month, I personally am not bothered by my relationship status, as I enjoy being single and can even see myself being single forever. I guess we'll see in a decade or two if I'm still single or if some girl decided to put up with my bullshit. I'm still betting on being a wizard, but I guess only time will tell. Now, after our rejection, me and that girl would pretty much just stop talking. However, we would still have a class together every semester, with us having Intermediate Accounting 2 together during the Spring 2023 semester, Intermediate Accounting 3 during the Fall 2023 semester, and Strategic Management during the Spring 2024 semester. Throughout 2023, we'd pretty much be total strangers, with us not talking to each other and almost pretending like we never knew each other. However, we'd ultimately make eye contact with each other again during the Spring 2024 semester. She sat directly behind me in Strategic Management, which I think explains how this happened. Anyways, one day at the end of February after class, I don't know why it happened, but she struck up a conversation with me and walked me back to my room, similar to how I always walked her to class back during the fall of 2022 semester. We mostly just updated each other on life and talked about plans after graduation. She told me about her successes with internships and intentions of enrolling in the Masters of Accountancy program, while I told her about the job offer I had been given a few months prior that I'll also talk about at the end of the story time. We didn't talk about our date or the rejection, which I'm glad, since I'm sure it was also hard on her too. But it was still pretty nice catching up with her, especially since the last time I had talked to her was when she rejected me, so it was nice to make things right, even if it took over a year. It also helped later that semester, as she would help me immensely with the audit project that provide me and my group some tips for it, so I'm glad she was still able to look at me beyond the person I was back in 2022. I do also want to comment on her growth as well, since she definitely changed quite a bit since the fall 2022 semester. I particularly noticed through her use of cuss words, as she never cussed back when we had a situationship, so it was somewhat odd hearing her say fuck more than me, but I ain't complaining, as I thought it was interesting seeing how she grew just as much as I did since then, if not more. So while the story pretty much ends with me being rejected, it at least ends in a somewhat good way, with me and her kind of talking again and becoming somewhat friends again over a year later. And honestly, looking back on it, I'm okay with her rejecting me, as I think that was a good decision. As desperate as I was for a relationship at the time, I don't think I was ready for one, as I had and still have many flaws that I'd say make me a very undesirable man. I think that for me to enter a relationship, I first will need to take on these flaws and improve myself, and then I can look at finding a woman, if I'm interested in one for the future. So while it felt fucking awful getting rejected, I think that this is the best possible outcome since it allowed me to reflect on myself and notice the flaws that I have. Alright. So moving on from that pretty intense story, let's end the fall 2022 stories by talking about a particularly funny story that took place at work. So I was working behind the desk when the phone rang, so I picked up the phone and prepared to answer the customer's question. However, this customer question has got to be the dumbest customer I've ever had the privilege of working with, even dumber than that woman who couldn't find the bookstore for the life of her. The question this customer asked was, "Hey, is this the athletics department?" Amazed at how he thought that he had the number to the athletics department, I told him that no, and that we were the campus bookstore. I assumed that it was likely just a mishap and that he copied the wrong number, which is understandable since it happens to everyone. However, while it should have ended there, it didn't. You see, even though I specifically told this customer that we were not the athletics department, he for some reason assumed that I said yes, because right after telling him that we were the bookstore, he asked if he could talk to one of the assistant football coaches. I genuinely wanted to laugh so hard because we literally had nothing to do with the athletics department, and even after telling him, he thought we worked with a football coach. Like, I don't know if he was expecting me to answer with, "Yeah, sure, the assistant football coach is in the back organizing back orders. Let me go get him real quick," but I don't think he realizes that we don't work with the athletics department. That'd be like me calling up some random high school and asking if they were the Golden State Warriors, and after being told no, I'd ask if I could speak to LeBron James. At least once I reminded him that we were the bookstore and not the athletics department, he simply hung up, where I then started laughing and told my manager what happened, to which she found herself laughing and making fun of me for the rest of the shift, often saying, "Zach, go get the assistant football coach for me," and some other silly stuff like that. I think it's safe to say that the customer is not going places, and he's definitely not being recruited if he thinks we're the athletics department. So that wraps up all the stories I wanted to share for the fall 2022 semester. Definitely a lot more eventful than the spring 2022 semester, especially with the situationship and going on my first ever date, but the other stuff too, like the idiot customers, the raccoons, and the guy in the cow costume definitely made this semester more interesting, and just all around enjoyable than the spring 2022 semester, and provided me with better and funnier stories. So that brings us to the stories from the spring 2023 semester. Now, unfortunately, this was by far my most boring semester at UNC Charlotte, as not a lot of funny or crazy stuff happened this semester. While a lot of accomplishments occurred, such as me starting my job as a peer tutor and getting over my rejection from the December before, there wasn't that much that happened. However, I still have two stories I figured that I would share. The first story took place on the first day of classes, being January 9th, 2023, during financial management, which I had from 12:20 to 1:10. Now, initially, this class's professor was listed as TBA because no professor had been assigned to the section, but I don't know what happened or if the finance department forgot about it, because when I and everyone else arrived, no professor showed up. In fact, there was no professor even 15 minutes after the class was supposed to start, and being a class of about 80 students, you could see the amount of chaos this ensured. Therefore, a couple of students took initiative. They went up to the front and told us that they would go and talk to the finance department about it. They also placed a sheet and let us write our names so that they could add us to a group chat. So that's what happened. I and everyone else went down to sign our names and then left class. Ultimately, the finance department would assign the class to a PhD student, and he would begin teaching the next class, which was Wednesday, January 11th. While this professor was pretty terrible, comparing him to the other professors who teach this class, he was likely the best option since all the other professors had super low rate my professor ratings. But nonetheless, it was still a pretty interesting way to start a class. Ironically enough, I'd experienced some more interesting things with the class schedules and failures on the college's part during the spring 2024 semester, which I'll get to then. Alright, So the only other story I have to tell for the spring 2023 semester will jump us from the beginning of the semester to the end of the semester to May 9th, 2023. A month prior, the renovations on Crown started, so it was being prepared to be turned into Social 704, where it would open up that fall. Therefore, for the remainder of the spring 2023 semester, dining services open up a temporary dining hall in Upper Prospector, which is where Mama Leone's and Bojangles Express is, above Chick-fil-A. While the food here was much better than Crown since they were using the Mama Leone's furnaces, finding a place to sit was an absolute nightmare, as there was not enough seats and oftentimes you'd have to wait for someone to get up before you could sit. This is actually the main issue with Crown and why they renovated it, although the Social 704 renovations ironically made things even worse. Now, this story also involves a goose, so UNC Charlotte is quite notorious for having issues with geese. While the geese wouldn't be a problem if they simply stayed by the Sovie pond, they end up causing issues because they think the entire campus is their home. As a result, they'll often stray away from the pond and even all over campus, most commonly the area near Prospector, McHenry, and Friday. As you might expect, this is an issue because this is where students and professors walk in clusters. So if you add in a geese who hisses at anyone who gets within 2 yards of it, that can cause issues. And these geese were not afraid of attacking either, as they send at least one student to the hospital every semester. Anyways, that brings me to Tuesday, May 9th. I was sitting in a cylinder-shaped part of Prospector eating dinner when all of a sudden, a goose just came flying right towards me. There was a window by me, so I knew it couldn't hurt me, but I don't know if the goose didn't see the glass or didn't care, because it literally flew straight into the window head first, causing a large thump noise and falling into the bush. I and everyone near me started laughing to death, even claiming the goose was drunk. At least the goose was okay, as it quickly got back up and flew off, but it was still super funny watching a goose fly straight into a window. So those are the only 2 semesters I have to share for the spring 2023 semester. Again, this is my least eventful semester, so you can kind of understand why not a whole lot of funny or crazy stuff happened this semester. Now, taking us away from the least eventful semester, we have one of the most eventful semesters in terms of craziness and stories, being the fall 2023 semester. This semester was jam-packed with a lot of funny and silly things that happened, and I'll be sharing 8 of those stories in the story time. The first story that I'll be telling y'all actually took place before the fall 2023 semester, as it took place in July at home. However, it took place during an online tutoring appointment, so I figured that I would bring it up since it still relates to college, even if I was at home when this happened. Anyways, I'm not too sure when in July, but it happened during a night tutoring session around 7:30. So during the second half of the summer, I held a recurring appointment for a guy in Principles of Accounting 1. I think at this particular session, we were reviewing inventory costing systems, so FIFO, LIFO, and average cost. Now, I usually kept my currents in my room open during tutoring sessions, since I would often attach a sticky note to my window telling me what sessions I had when. The session started off normal, where I showed the tutee the different costing methods and how to use them, but that's when all of a sudden, I noticed a car going over 100 miles an hour past my house. The speed limit for the road I live on is 35, so you bet that seeing a car going 100 miles an hour shocked me quite a bit. But then, I saw a ton of police sirens. At this point, I was having trouble focusing on tutoring and told the tutee what just happened, to which he was super excited. I then pointed my phone towards my window to let him see, where we saw an army of police cars with their sirens on going crazy fast on the road. That car that the officers were chasing would actually loop back, so we would see them again. Therefore, me and the tutee would stop the tutoring and spend the rest of the session watching this police chase, since this stuff almost never happens where I live. Now, the day after, I found this chase on the news, and the details about it were even crazier than what I expected. Apparently, this man had killed someone in Gaston County and was fleeing the Gaston County Police Department by car. However, this was no normal car chase, as he was actually pretty good at going high speeds and even managed to reach Cleveland County, the county west of Gaston. The Gaston County Sheriff contacted the Cleveland County Sheriff, so now this man had 2 county police departments on his tail. But it gets even crazier, because despite having 2 county police departments chasing him, he was still getting away. Therefore, the Gaston County Sheriff got in contact with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, where they then brought a full-on helicopter to go after the man, in addition to even more officers for support. This man, who had re-entered Gaston County, now had 3 police departments on his ass, including a full-blown helicopter, was really at it. Ultimately, he was called a little while later and was charged with murder and a whole bunch of other traffic-related crimes from the police chase. He's currently waiting for trial, and as you can expect, he's being held without bond, so this is a really serious string of crimes. But nonetheless, this is still quite amusing for me in the 2D, since not only was this a crazy police chase, but police chases or other crimes are super rare where I live, since I live in a relatively peaceful neighborhood. The next story I want to tell y'all, as well as all the remaining stories in the story time, took place at UNC Charlotte. Anyways, the next one involves two of my roommates. So this took place near the end of August. Me and one of the roommates were in the living room chilling when the other one came out of his bedroom with his girlfriend so that they could go to Social 704. However, upon exiting his bedroom and locking it, he immediately realized that he did not have his room key or student ID. This meant that not only could he not get back into his room, but he couldn't even get into Belk Hall since you have to have your student ID to get into a residence hall. As a result, he started to freak out. However, he got incredibly lucky because the key and student ID, which he had attached together, had fallen off of his desk and were on the floor right at the door. Because there's about an inch of wiggle room underneath the door, that meant that theoretically, someone could wave something underneath and get it through. And that's the next thought process that went through the other roommate's mind. So he took a hanger and tried to swing it under the door to see if he could get it. However, the key and ID were a little bit too far away, so he needed something longer. That's when a stroke of genius popped into his mind. He noticed some remaining cardboard from a 24-pack case of Dr. Pepper that I had used up and placed it in the recycle bin. So he took it and cut long pieces out of it. After taping them together, he was able to create an 8 feet long cardboard string. I then let him use a hanger hook and then he placed the hook at the end. Once the contraption was finished, he put it to the test. He slipped the cardboard string underneath the door and after a few tries, he actually managed to get the key. He didn't hand the key to our other roommate, and he was able to get back into the room and collect his ID without having to spend $20 on a loan key replacement. If this doesn't demonstrate what lengths college students will take to avoid paying small fees, I don't know what will, as this was probably the most ingenious idea put into practice that I've ever seen. In fact, we would even keep the cardboard string for the remainder of the school year just in case something like this was to happen again. Alright, so the next story I want to tell y'all isn't exactly a funny or crazy story, but it's a good story that involves me dodging not just a bullet, but a tactical nuke. So originally, I was taking 15 credit hours for the fall 2023 semester, which consisted of the classes I mentioned when discussing this semester, as well as a class called Law and Economics. This class met every Thursday from 7 to 9:45, so it was a late night class that was also pretty long. Anyways, upon attending my first class, I immediately noticed some red flags with regards to the professor. So I think that this professor might have had the biggest superiority complex of any professor I've come across, as he truly thought that he was better than all of us. While I could give him the benefit of the doubt since he was a judge, this wasn't a courtroom, it was a classroom. Therefore, his superiority complex was unneeded. A good example of his superiority complex would be his attendance and late policy. So he had a really strict attendance policy, similar to that of my Western history professor, just that it was even stricter. And by stricter, I mean that if we missed even one class, we would get a letter grade drop. Yeah, his attendance policy was that strict. Even though I've never had issues with attendance, I've always hated attendance policies because they don't really show understanding of the course material. They just show that you go to class, which is the bare minimum to be successful in a class. However, he also hated students coming in late, so he treated tardiness as equivalent to absences, meaning if you're late, you might as well not attend because he was that strict about tardiness. But even though his attendance policy was strict, that doesn't necessarily give him a superiority complex. But what does is that he didn't follow these rules himself. You see, during class, he told us that he would often be upwards of an hour late to classes because of work, but said that we were expected to arrive on time and attend every class. He also said that the 15-minute rule doesn't apply to his class, which if you don't know what that is, basically if a professor is at least 15 minutes late to class, students can leave and not get counted absent. Most professors abide by this rule and generally speaking abide by the policies they set for the class. However, our professor said himself that the rules don't apply to him and that said that because he was the professor, he could do whatever he wanted. This immediately struck me as a huge red flag, since he was basically saying, rules for thee, but not for me. Every other professor I've had, with the exception of my Western history professor, abided by the same rules they set for the class. So whatever rules we were expected to follow, our professor would follow the rules themselves. But with my law and economics professor, he believed that he was above the rules, so we treated the class like we were all inferior to him. Now, the real story involves him trying to exert the superiority complex over me, but I wouldn't take his bullshit. So prior to the semester starting, I signed up in particular and meet the professionals, which I've already explained since that's where I met the cute redhead during the fall 2022 semester. Anyways, I signed up to participate in again for the fall 2023 semester with the hopes of finding a full-time position. Spoiler alert, I was successful and my company here, and I'll get to that later. Now, there was one issue with signing up for Meet the Professionals, and that was the fact that it was on 2 Wednesdays and 2 Thursdays. The Thursday times were during Law and Economics, meaning I would have to miss 2 classes. Therefore, about a week before the event, I emailed my Law and Economics professor and let him know what was going on. Because it was a Belk College of Business sponsored event, and because I provided the contact information to the group running the program, I was expecting him to respond saying that it was fine for me to leave class, and he would provide makeup work, especially since every other professor has excused me from class for this. However, instead of that happening, I was greeted with an angry email from him. Basically, he told me that he would not excuse my absences, and even went as far as telling me that I needed to choose between his class and Meet the Professionals, where he then told me I should choose his class because this event was pointless and wouldn't get me anywhere. Right after I received that email, I knew that my law and economics professor was not only an authoritarian, but an asshole who clearly did not care about his students. Every other professor I've had would be more than willing to let me attend the session. In fact, my intermediate accounting 3 professor, who actually coordinated this event, even offered extra credit for students attending this, since this was a fantastic networking opportunity. So that pretty much told me that my law and economics professor was a piece of shit who really shouldn't have his job, since it was clear that he didn't care about his student success. I then calculated my grade and determined that I couldn't make anything higher than a C if I stayed in the class. Therefore, I decided to withdraw from the class, the only withdrawal I've ever had while at UNC Charlotte. While this might have been an odd choice, since I was giving up a whole class just to attend a professional development event, this would go on to be the best decision. The reason is because I think the second week of the event, I met the firm I would ultimately be offered a position with. In fact, literally just the week after the event and handing them my resume, they called me in for an online interview. I did the interview, and just 2 days later, they offered me the job. The job was for a public tax position in Charlotte, and I'll talk more about it at the end of the story time when I discuss future plans. But nonetheless, this ultimately proved that withdrawing from law and economics was a good thing, since had I stayed in the class, I would not have been offered this position. I also think that even had I not gotten the job offer, this still would have been a great decision, because I heard that this professor was an absolute power trip throughout the semester, often abusing his power and just being a dick all around, so I definitely dodged a huge tactical nuke by withdrawing from this class. Alright, so the next story takes us back to the rather silly and crazy stuff. For it, we're going to head off to late September during the beginning of class in Intermediate Accounting 3. It was supposed to be a normal class where our professor reviewed our first exam with us and started on the next chapter. However, about 15 minutes into class, an obnoxiously loud alarm sounded outside the classroom. Our professor then went outside to navigate, and sure enough, it was a fire alarm, so he went back into the classroom and told us the fire alarm was going off. We then calmly walked outside, which didn't take too long before our classroom was close to the exit. We then all went towards a nearby field. If you're looking at a map, the field we were at was a grass field southeast of Friday and directly south of Fretwell. I didn't have friends in this class just yet, so I just simply spent the next 30 minutes on my phone outside, while everyone else gathered around and joked around. I did, however, overhear a couple of Intermediate Accounting 2 students talking amongst themselves. Apparently, they were in the middle of an exam when the alarm went off, which has got to be the worst time for the alarm to go off. They quickly came to the conclusion that someone was trying to get out of the exam, so they set the fire alarm off, which is a pretty reasonable explanation. If that was actually the case, that would be really funny, but I personally doubt that actually happened. Anyways, the fire department arrived 20 minutes later and went through the Friday in order to find the smoke. They were able to take care of things, and about 10 minutes later, we were able to get back into the building, where class continued as normal, just that our professor had to record a video for the remainder of what he wanted to cover because the alarm prevented that. Alright, So the next story I want to tell y'all took place in tax a little bit before class started. So literally the day after the fire alarm incident in Intermediate Accounting 3, we were just chilling when all of a sudden, a yellow jacket started flying around the classroom. Some students squealed, some got nervous, and all around, it was chaos. Now, you will come to know that I hate bees, yellow jackets, or anything that stinks. I'm not allergic to them, I just really hate bees and yellow jackets. And things only got worse when the yellow jacket landed on the desk of the person in front of me. At this point, I was super scared and knew that something needed to be done. Therefore, I took one of my shoes off and slammed it down on that motherfucker as hard as I could while making a loud bang noise. The impact was so big that the yellow jacket, whose guts had fallen out of its insides, flew off the desk and onto the ground. Everyone then clapped once the girl confirmed that the yellow jacket was dead, where she then picked it up in a sheet of paper and threw it away. Definitely a rather terrifying way to start class, but at least I did something cool and saved the class since even our professor was quite scared. For the next story, we're going to skip over to November. So in Intermediate Accounting 3, we were discussing our final chapter, which was a course on accounting for income taxes. And one particular problem that our professor was working on, the problem required us to calculate the deferred tax asset or deferred tax liability on a financial derivative. Now, while we had worked with a multitude of financial instruments throughout the intermediate accounting classes, especially in Intermediate Accounting 2 when we did an entire chapter on investments, which was in my opinion the hardest chapter in all three of the intermediate accounting classes. However, we had never really worked with derivatives before, since those are usually more complicated investments as compared to things like stocks and bonds. So in order to show us how to approach the problem, our professor asked us what a derivative was, and that's when one student gave an answer that I still laugh at to this day. I don't know if he forgot what class he was in, but instead of talking about it being a financial investment, he said dy over dx. Our professor's face then just went completely blank, as we all then laughed, since our professor was talking about financial derivatives, not derivatives from calculus. Our professor didn't know what a mathematical derivative was, so he was completely dumbfounded by this response, so he then explained what financial derivatives were. But nonetheless, this is probably the funniest response to a question I've ever heard. And to be fair, I can't shit on that student for trying, since if our professor asked me directly, I probably would have said the slope of a tangent line or something else along what the student said, since I'm way more comfortable with calculus than financial derivatives. The next story I want to tell took place 2 weeks after the derivative incident. It happened in tax. So in tax, we did a group project where we had to fill out a tax return for The Simpsons. I was lucky to be paired with the good group, as my group all put their fair share of effort and got things done. It also helped that our one group member's mom was a tax accountant, so we got her to help us out too. Therefore, the project wasn't too bad. However, to say that we finished at the very last minute would be an understatement, as we finished at the very last second. Like, we finished this project literally just 10 minutes before class started, where we were required to turn in our project. We finished it in the Atkins library, by the way, but we also had to print, so we printed the stuff and that took about 7 minutes. But knowing that just walking to class wasn't going to be enough time to make it on time, I volunteered to run to class as fast as possible to get the project delivered on time. The group agreed, so when the last page was printed, I handed my book back to one of my group members, took the project, and bolted out of the library as fast as I could. Getting from the library to McHenry was surprisingly difficult, as while walking to the two places was nothing, running to the two places was very difficult. But I kept my endurance and kept running and eventually made it to McHenry and into class. However, I can't say that I arrived comfortably, as I was absolutely exhausted, and everyone in class noticed since I was breathing extremely heavily and sweating. The whole class immediately became worried as they were asking me if I was okay, where I held the group's tax return project and everyone started clapping after they realized why I was so exhausted. I then handed the return to our professor, where he proceeded to tell the class that taxes will take our breath away, which was really funny since it literally took my breath away. He didn't let me leave class for a little bit to get water, so I did just that, although the class was still concerned for me after seeing me lose my breath. But things got better when the rest of the group returned 5 minutes later. While they returned, everyone started cheering, including our professor, who congratulated them on making it to class, where he then joked about me and the rest of the class started laughing. Again, as our professor said, taxes take your breath away. Now, the final story I'll be telling y'all for the fall 2023 semester takes us to my Business Calc Reading Day review session on December 7th, 2023. Now, how the session worked was that we were in a big classroom on the 3rd floor of Colvard, aka 2nd floor of the Colvard South. I was sitting on the professor's desk and using a projector to do problems by hand. However, around midway through the session, I was showing the attendees how to calculate definite integrals on the calculator, so I had to lean over to grab my calculator, but in doing so, I ended up kicking a ceramic mug that was on the footrest of the professor's desk. When this happened, a loud braille noise could be heard, where the attendees started to wonder what it was. I then said that I think I kicked something, so I went underneath the desk to get it, where I found a ceramic mug. When I grabbed the mug, I immediately held it up for everyone to see, where all my attendees started laughing as I got out of the desk and held the mug up even higher like a trophy. I then talked about how much shit professors left behind on the desk, and set the mug down on the table beside the desk. Afterwards, the session continued as normal, but it definitely made the session memorable. And with that wraps up all the stories I have to tell from the fall 2023 semester. Definitely a lot more stuff happened this semester as opposed to the spring 2023 semester, which is usually a good thing because it means more fun for y'all. So with that said, let's talk about some stories from the spring 2024 semester. This semester would go on to be an even crazier semester than the fall 2023 semester, which is kind of expected since this was my last semester. I got 8 stories to share from this semester, so let's talk about some crazy stuff that happened. The first thing that I'll talk about took place on Sunday, January 7th, so before classes even began. In fact, the first 3 stories I'll be sharing took place before classes even started. Anyways, I moved back into college on January 2nd, which while very early, I had to do so because I needed to be on campus for the beginning of the semester tutoring orientation. So that's what I did. I moved in early and got to enjoy a few days with the room by myself. However, on the night of January 7th, the fire alarm set off. Now, fire alarms at Belk were not very common. In fact, the only times the alarm went off was because of some asshole on my floor who kept smoking weed in his room, resulting in the fire alarm going off every other day for 2 weeks. After he got kicked off campus for continually setting the fire alarm off, we didn't have a fire alarm since then until this incident. Anyways, I and everyone else exited the building, expecting it to be a usual fire alarm. However, after spending over 30 minutes outside in 40-degree weather, we realized that something was definitely up, as the alarm should have ended much sooner. Some more time passed, and eventually, due to how cold it was outside and because of how long it was taking, we were led into Lynch Hall, a freshman-only dorm beside Belk, so that we could be in a warmer area. So that's where we went. We spent another 45 minutes there until eventually we were finally able to go back in. Now, that begs the question, why the fuck did it take so long for the fire alarm to be taken care of? Well, as it turns out, there was actually not a fire at all. Instead, the lobby was flooded. Apparently, there was some failure in the water system, and as a result, it flooded the entire 3rd floor lobby and caused a huge mess. The RAs purposely set off the fire alarm so that we would all leave the building, since it was deemed too dangerous to stay inside. In fact, the next day, when walking through the lobby, I noticed that the lobby had been intensely bleached and the furniture was still soaking wet. Definitely an interesting way for the fire alarm to go off, and it would also thankfully be one of the only times the fire alarm went off that semester. The next 2 stories I have to tell both took place during tutoring orientation. Tutoring orientation took place in the Science Building, which is at the very eastern end of Craver Road, on Monday, January 8th to Tuesday, January 9th, both days lasting from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. These 2 stories in particular both took place on Tuesday, January 9th. Anyways, the first story involves the weather. So on this day, it was raining and thundering pretty hard. Additionally, the perfect conditions for a tornado were in place, so all of Mecklenburg County and the surrounding counties in the Charlotte metro area were placed under a tornado watch, which is quite rare for January since it's usually too cold for a tornado to spawn. However, later that day, while my boss was going over some stuff, the emergency system went absolutely berserk. All of our phones did the same. The reason is because a tornado had been spotted not too far from campus, meaning we had a tornado warning. Our boss then gathered us all and we went to the center of the Science Building, where windows were not present and waited out the warning there. Now, here in the South, tornadoes are pretty common and, to be honest, not as scary as people think. I know my Northeastern and Western viewers might think I'm crazy, but tornadoes are not that scary at all. In fact, we have a joke here in North Carolina that you're supposed to go outside when a tornado strikes with a beer and watch it pass. The same goes for hurricanes, since we get those annually. So as you might expect, we really did not take this emergency very seriously, since we're all used to tornadoes. In fact, if the system hadn't gone off, we'd probably still be doing our training. Therefore, we spent the next 30 minutes joking around, cutting up, and just doing whatever we could until the emergency system finally stopped, where we then returned to training. Alright. So the next story took place just 30 minutes after we got back from the tornado. For it, we basically had to partner with someone and demonstrate to everyone how a tutor should or shouldn't act, given a certain scenario. I partnered with Evan. How it worked was that I was supposed to be the tutor and he was supposed to be the tutee, and my goal was to end the session on a bad note. So I was supposed to be rude, disrespectful, and just a pure asshole all around to demonstrate how to not wrap up a tutoring session. So that's what happened. I pretended to be tutoring business calc to Evan, where we wrapped up the session with him asking about an integral that I basically told him to screw off. That's when Evan took the spotlight, where he then got up and walked to the other side of the table we were doing our skit near. He then whipped out his phone and pretended to call his friend. That's when in front of our boss, tutoring GAs, and in front of multiple new tutors, he said on the phone, "Yo, this tutor fucking sucked." Even I wasn't expecting him to swear in the skit since he didn't mention saying it, and it seems like nobody else was either, as everyone then cracked up. Even our boss found herself dying of laughter while everyone then cheered as hard as they could. Once everyone calmed down and me and Evan went back to our seats, our boss then kind of went over and what we were doing, even went into detail about setting good impressions and trying our best to represent the tutoring department and all. So it at least taught everyone a pretty important lesson in the funniest way possible. The next story I want to share with y'all took place 2 days later on the second day of classes. That morning was my first managerial accounting class, so I got up and got ready for class. However, when I arrived to class, I found a huge group of people standing outside the classroom. I assumed that this was my class, so I stood outside with them. I would eventually learn that I was with the right class, but the problem was that in the classroom, an operations management class was already in the classroom. Apparently, the classroom somehow got double booked, and as a result, there were 2 classes assigned for our classroom at the same time. Eventually, our professor arrived and took note of the situation. She then emailed the tutoring department, the accounting department, asking what was up, and afterwards, she had us all follow her around and look for a vacant classroom. It was pretty funny, especially since it was 40 of us following our professor throughout basically the entirety of the first floor Friday. Eventually, after a little bit of searching, we found a vacant classroom and had class there. Ultimately, the department did grant us the original classroom the operations management was in, so we won that classroom. I'm glad we did, as Friday 130 is one of my favorite classrooms for the portable chargers, good space, and not terribly large, so I'm glad we ultimately got it. The next story I have to tell deals with an issue between our strategic management professor and the campus bookstore. So just for some background information, starting the fall 2023 semester, UNC Charlotte started the program called the Niner Course Pack. Basically, this system automatically charges you $20 for every credit you are registered for, but it gives access to all course materials for the class. It's not optimal if you don't have much course materials, so you could simply opt out. However, in my case, I found that it was the best way to enter during both fall 2023 and spring 2024 semesters, so I stayed in for it. Anyways, throughout strategic management, we used a platform called Globus. Globus is an online game that simulates actual business. So we were split into groups of 3 and had to compete with other groups to determine who could earn the most profits, revenues, best credit ratings, and best company image. Now, Globus was worth 25% of our grade, therefore, it was pretty much required for us to pass the class. Therefore, it should have been included in the Niner course pack for this class, and it was, as when the email was sent to us regarding course materials, it was included in it. However, I don't know what happened, but those of us who were enrolled in the Niner course pack were not provided with any code for Globus. However, we were supposed to be provided with it, since in the email that confirmed our course materials in the course pack, it was listed there, just not with our course material, just our course code. My other course materials did have their course code, so I was really confused about it, so I reached out to the rest of the class, and sure enough, nobody else was given a code. Once I realized that everyone else was having this issue, I emailed the professor informing him of the situation, where he recommended that I reach out to the bookstore. So I did as he said. However, the bookstore provided instructions for the wrong platform, as they sent me a PowerPoint presentation on accessing Connect, not Globus. I then told them the issue we were having was with Globus and not Connect, but they never responded. I didn't inform our professor, so he did as I did and reached out to the bookstore himself. However, they ended up responding with the same thing, which dumbfounded him as much as it did me. By then, around 2 weeks had passed since classes started, and by then, we were supposed to start on the practice rounds for Globus, so our professor was beginning to get impatient. Therefore, he decided to pay a visit to the bookstore and ask about it, where he would eventually learn that the publisher who was responsible for delivering the access codes had not delivered them to the bookstore. So our professor then contacted the publisher, and only then was he finally able to get access to the codes. By then, it was already February, so we went an entire month without having access to Globus before we finally had it. But it's still crazy to think about, especially since the bookstore did not want to work with us and knowingly gave information to the wrong resource instead of admitting what was going on. It was ridiculous, but we finally got the codes and were able to play the simulation for less weeks than planned. The next story is about a big mistake that a new PAL leader made that caused a little bit of chaos throughout the tutoring department for a few minutes. So on Monday, January 29th, I wrapped up my economics drop-ins and was packing up and heading off to class. However, right as I had everything packed, a group of maybe 10 students walked in, where one of them asked if this was the accounting PAL session was. I told them that this is the tutoring department and asked if they were looking for drop-in hours. However, they told me that their PAL leader told them to meet at the tutoring center for whatever reason and they were looking for her. This really confused me since PAL leaders usually don't hang out in the tutoring center, as that's where tutoring takes place. Eventually, one of the GAs came over and was able to handle the situation. As I would learn from the GA, apparently the PAL leader meant to send her students to drop-in hours for accounting, not a PAL session, which is strange in of itself because nobody did accounting drop-ins on Mondays. Mine were on Fridays, and I knew the two other tutors who did theirs on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, so I have no idea what this PAL leader was looking at. Ultimately, our GA let it slide since our PAL leader was new to the UCAE, but it's still crazy that she made this a big mistake, as I didn't even make this big of a mistake when I started the spring prior, and I usually make huge mistakes when starting somewhere. The next story I'll tell is a rather serious one, so beware. It took place on Thursday, February 1st. Now, for a little bit of background information, in April of 2019, a gunman opened fire in a classroom, killing 2 students and injuring many others. This event traumatized the UNC Charlotte community, and many memorials have been built in honor of the victims. And because of it, you would expect the campus police to take threats of such incidents very seriously, right? Well, unfortunately, not all the time. Anyways, this happened while I was at work, so I was in Colvard when this happened. I was tutoring a girl in microeconomics in a big glass room. At around 12:20, my boss came in, went to a wall, and flipped a switch, where the glass became covered by a thick opaque curtain. Me and my tutee and everyone else in the room were confused as to what was going on. In fact, me and my tutee temporarily stopped the session, just to figure out what was going on. At first, we thought someone was complaining about the sun and not being able to see their computer screen. However, me and the tutee quickly rejected the idea when she checked her phone and got a 9 alert notification about campus going on lockdown. I got the same notification on my phone as well. So we spent the next minute talking with everyone else in the room, wondering why the hell campus was on lockdown. Thankfully, this only lasted for a minute, as shortly afterwards, we were notified that the lockdown was lifted and my boss undid the curtains. However, nobody knew why we had gone under lockdown and what was going on, which kinda set an eerie atmosphere for the rest of the day at work. Later that day, though, I would learn what happened. Apparently, someone reported gunfire in the College of Education building. However, campus police had a delayed response, as they only responded and put the university under lockdown 30 minutes after the report was made, as they initially received the report at 11:52. Thankfully, this report was just a fabrication. So once the police determined that the campus was fine, campus was opened back up. However, the response time by police would cause a huge controversy, as it took campus police 30 minutes to even do anything about the incident. Had this been a real threat where there was an actual mass shooter, many people would have died. The worst part is that the campus police never issued an apology or presented things that they would do differently, which concerns me because it shows that they didn't really care about the safety of students. This is especially awful when you consider the fact that our school had a real mass shooting 5 years prior to this incident, so you would think that campus police would take these threats a lot more seriously. However, it's not just us students who are disappointed with the police response, as even the local news was concerned about it too. They interviewed multiple students and reported on the situation multiple times, but even with the negative publicity, the only thing that happened as a result of it was the chancellor making an announcement and giving some suggestions about what they will improve on, which I don't think are that good of solutions since they aren't dealing with the root of the issue, that being the delayed response from police. The things she mentioned were lockdown kits, faculty training of lockdowns, and 9er alerts. There was nothing on improving campus police response time, so the university definitely took an L from the situation, but it at least shined a spotlight on a key issue that maybe eventually UNC Charlotte management will fix. Now, the rest of the semester overall was rather uneventful in terms of crazy stuff happening that's worthy of being shared as a story. That is until we get to April, where I have two stories related to tutoring that I want to share that both happen to take place on the same day, being Wednesday, April 24th. The first story I have to tell is actually a story that my 2D told me. Now, me and this 2D were and still are great friends, as I worked with him in business calc during the fall 2023 semester, and then during the spring 2024 semester, I helped him in statistics. We often cracked jokes and told stupid stories during tutoring appointments. However, this one he told was hands down the funniest shit I think I ever heard from a 2D. Anyways, this semester, alongside statistics, my 2D was taking management and organizational behavior, which was one of the summer 2023 classes I took that I discussed in part A. Anyways, he was taking this class in person and not over the summer. He had to do quite a few presentations in this class. However, his last presentation for the class ended up being one that not only both of us will remember, but is also one that the professor and the rest of the students will probably remember forever. Anyways, for this presentation, my 2D worked with I think 3 other students to do a PowerPoint presentation on a topic. Not entirely sure what the topic they were working on, but I want to think it had something to do with sustainability. However, what I do remember was that the group decided to use a theme to go along with the presentation. That theme being the Lorax movie, inspired by Dr. Seuss's well-known children's book. Anyways, the story is basically about a big corporation wanting to tear down a forest in order to increase their profits and grow their business. However, the forest is home to a creature called the Lorax, and it's the main character's job, whose name is Freddy, to convince the corporation not tear down the forest. This is hopefully accurate to the plot, as it's been many years since I last saw this movie. Anyways, for this presentation, my 2D and his partners went all out with this presentation, as they went out of their way to purchase costumes and other props, with each group member dressed up as a different character. My 2D dressed up as that one character who's saying "How bad can I be?" To say that the class is amused would be an understatement, as just these props alone had the entire class laughing. But it got even better, as during the presentation, the group played a clip from the Lorax, and throughout the presentation, they acted like their characters. In fact, my 2D even chased the member that played the Lorax across the classroom, cracking everyone up. However, midway through the chase, my 2D tripped on the steps, which, while not intended in their script, cracked the class even more. And to make the actual presenting information part even better, my 2D and his group discussed the details of their topic in character. In fact, my 2D even said some of the lyrics to "How Bad Can I Be?", although he unfortunately didn't sing it. Still, the whole class and professor were cracking up and laughing their asses off, so it's fine. Then once they finished, they got the loudest round of applause ever, as everyone, especially their professor, were not only laughing insanely hard, but were thoroughly impressed with how well they presented the information. My 2D and his group all got 100 on this project, and their professor even said that their presentation was the best presentation he ever witnessed throughout his teaching career. And as you might expect, pretty much the entire time my 2D was describing his presentation to me, I was dying laughing, as I have never heard of anyone doing something like this for a presentation. Like, y'all don't know how badly I wish I was there, as just hearing this from my 2D was absolutely hilarious. At least once I calmed down a little, I challenged my 2D to do an even better presentation and record it for when he takes strategic management next spring, which he told me he will and send the video to me, so maybe next year I'll get to see an even crazier presentation. Since Storytime in 2025 will be quite different from how it's always been, I'm sure I'll be able to talk about it in one of those future story times. Now, the other April story I want to share also took place on this day, just a couple hours later, and it's in my opinion the most wholesome of the stories I'll be telling. So on Wednesdays, how tutoring worked is that from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., I did my drop-ins for business calc and statistics. Then from 1 to 2, I had that 2D I just talked about for statistics. Afterwards, I would take off and go to intermediate microeconomics and audit. After getting out of audit, I would return to the tutoring center for a 5:30 to 6:30 appointment, where I saw this girl every week for intermediate accounting 1. So generally speaking, Wednesdays were my most structured days since I met with the same people at the same time each week, which made Wednesdays pretty nice. Now, as for some information about this 2D, like the 2D from the last story, I'm not going to mention her name or anything like that since while we're good friends, I want to respect and uphold the privacy of all my former 2Ds. But anyways, she was a super sweet and an amazing 2D to work with. Back in the fall, I tutored her friend and that friend actually recommended me to her. As a tutor, pretty much the best thing a 2D could tell me was that another 2D of mine recommended me. This also put me in a great mood for the rest of the day since not only did it show that I genuinely helped a 2D out, but they enjoyed the session so much that they told a friend about me, meaning I was doing my job well. I actually had quite a few 2Ds as a result of recommendations, which was really nice. I remember that friend in particular because she was my second ever 2D for intermediate accounting and the first 2D I ever showed the calculator shortcut for time value of money, which is pretty special because as mentioned in part A, that was my favorite chapter from the class as well as one of my favorite calculator shortcuts. So it was nice showing her it and helping her out with the chapter. Anyways, the 2D I had during the spring was taking Intermediate Accounting 1 instead of Principles Accounting 2, since although she was not required to take it since she was an international business major, she hated managerial accounting from Principles Accounting 1 and didn't want to take an entire class on it, so she decided to go for the big dog instead. As much as I usually advise against taking this class for non-accounting and finance majors, I can understand taking if you really hated managerial accounting that much, so I 100% understand her decision for taking this class. However, the only issue was that she was struggling, as this is a hard class. So that's why, like any other good student who wants to be successful in a class, she decided to take initiative, with her initiative being going to tutoring. Turns out that would be a great decision on her part, as she would gain a better understanding of the material during our sessions, I would make her feel better about the material, her grades increased, and we would both have a fun time throughout the semester going through course material and joking around, since we both made fun of each other almost every session. That brings us to our last tutoring session. Throughout the session, I helped her prepare for her final by telling her all the material that was going to be on the final and giving her some tips. It was a great session and she was able to remember a lot of material discussed earlier in the class. Then came the end of the session. The end of the last session for recurring appointments was always sad for me in the 2D, since that meant the end of our sessions. It was especially sad this semester, since it marked the end of my job as a tutor. Anyways, for the last 10 minutes of the session, me and my 2D just talked and joked around. She thanked me for helping her throughout the semester, and we talked about her plans after the semester. However, while I was putting a marker up, she asked for something I didn't see coming, but it would at least be something that still puts a smile on my face whenever I think about it. She asked for a hug. I said sure, and we hugged for a couple seconds, which just might have been my most wholesome and sweetest interaction with a 2D. Afterwards, she thanked me again for helping her out that semester, and then she left, which was my last interaction with her. Alex and another tutor friend were there and watched us hug, and they both told me that it was super adorable and sweet, especially since the three of us always tutored at the same time on Wednesdays, and they even got to know my 2D a little bit too, so it was really sweet. And what's crazy is that despite being a month ago, I still think about this interaction pretty often. Even though you might think that it's just a hug, I feel more deeply about it since not only do I rarely give or receive hugs, but more because of the intuition behind the hug. I helped this 2D out so much that it made such an impact on her that she hugged me. It's really cool to think about and always makes me so happy because of how much I was able to help her out, as it always reminds me of just how much I did for 2Ds. Oh, and if you're wondering, she did great on her final and passed the class, which she absolutely deserved because of how hard she worked that semester. Alright, so the last story I'm going to tell is a really silly one about Evan. It took place the night of Wednesday, May 8th. Earlier that day, Evan came over to my room and we had pizza and played Minecraft. It was pretty fun having him over. However, you'll come to know that me and Evan are very different from each other in terms of personality. While I'm a lot more reserved, shy, and pure, Evan's a lot more outgoing, energetic, and more down to do crazy stuff. And that night at around 11, he did just that, as he went with some friends to a bar and drank a lot of beer. Now, Evan didn't invite me since he knew I wasn't into that stuff, nor was I old enough since I don't turn 21 until 2025, which I very much respected and appreciate him for considering my beliefs on it. However, I at least got to experience Evan being crazy a little bit during his interaction with his friends, as around midnight, he called me. When I picked up the phone, he talked to me in a very slated and sloppy voice, not like what he usually sounded like. As he would tell me afterwards, he was drunk, so for the next couple of minutes, I played around with him a little bit. One such instance was when I showed him some linear algebra problems I was doing, and he said, "That linear algebra you're doing, that's pretty crazy, dude. You're a great magician," to which I cried laughing from since Evan thought I was doing magic. I played around with him some more until eventually I had to get serious since I needed to make sure that he had a designated driver. Thankfully he did, so I didn't need to worry. And then a little while later, he hung up. We still talk about that incident all the time, although he doesn't remember calling me a magician, but nonetheless, it was super funny talking to him while he was super drunk and couldn't think straight. And that pretty much wraps up all the stories I got for both the spring 2024 semester and all my college experience. Quite a lot happened during my time at UNC Charlotte, including some pretty crazy, funny, and wholesome stuff that happened that I wanted to share. I'm sure I would have more stories to tell if I was more involved on campus or went to parties and stuff, but I'm not a party person, so I don't have as many stories to tell. But I still feel I had quite a few, so I hope you all enjoyed them. For the next portion of this story time, I'm going to do the same thing as Storytime 43, where I'll be discussing my last day of college, which would be my graduation ceremony commencement. For high school, my commencement wasn't until after my first semester of college, since I was the only student who graduated early. However, since UNC Charlotte does both fall and spring commencements, my last day would be my commencement, to which that was the case, so I figured that I would talk about it here. Anyways, UNC Charlotte does 4 commencement ceremonies each semester, meaning your ceremony will depend on what degree you are graduating with. In my case, as a business student, my graduation was on Friday, May 10th at 10 a.m. in the Holton Arena, which is where our basketball team plays. It's in a building called the Barnhart Student Activity Center, which is south of the MedBain and College of Health and Human Services building. We were required to arrive at least an hour and a half early, meaning I had to arrive at 8:30 in the morning. This was not fun whatsoever, as I barely got any sleep the night before. I was really anxious about commencement, and as a result, I only got 3 hours of sleep. The worst part is that these 3 hours of sleep were not good, as out of anything I could have dreamed about, I dreamed about fucking linear algebra. So I didn't sleep too well, and it definitely showed throughout the day, as I was super tired. I'll talk more about being tired later. For now, let's talk about the start of the day, being around 6 a.m., which was when I woke up. Since I didn't have to be at the Holton Arena until 8:30, I just laid around and didn't do much. Then at around 7:30, I changed into some dress clothes and then put my graduation gown over it, as well as my 2 cords and stole. My stole was a pure white stole to represent that I graduated with honors, while one of my cords was a pure green cord to represent me graduating cum laude, and the other was a cyan and bright green cord to show that I worked as a peer tutor for the tutoring department. My tassel was a grayish pink color to show that I was a business major, so I graduated with at least a couple of things. Not as much as high school, where I think I had stuff for being summa cum laude, National Honor Society, Beta Club, and a few other things, but still, I at least graduated with a few things. Anyways, at around 8 o'clock, I took off and headed off to the Holton Arena, where I arrived about 15 minutes early. Thankfully, Mio, a fellow accounting student who was part of my study group for Intermediate Accounting 3 and one of my audit project group members, was there too, so I wasn't completely alone, waiting for the doors to open. Then at 8:30, security was ready and we were able to get in. However, we had to walk downstairs, which proved to be challenging for Mio because she wore high heels, so I had to help her down the stairs. But once we got down, we went to the practice basketball court, where we were sorted into lines that depended on our degree and last name. Accounting majors would be the very first group of people to be called, and since my last name begins with a B, I would be one of the first people walking the stage, placing me in line 1. In fact, I was the 10th person that day to walk the stage, which is pretty crazy to think since I was there since I think there was almost 2,000 students at just this graduation ceremony alone. Anyways, for the next 30 minutes, I talked with a friend of mine whom I worked on the tax return project with back in tax. We both liked anime, so we talked about anime. While we talked, my Intermediate Accounting 1 and 2 professor said hello, and so did my Intermediate Accounting 3 professor, which is really nice seeing the two of them again. After a little while, it was time for us to enter the arena, so they guided us over to the arena, where we did some weird-ass maneuvers. Like, I have no idea what the fuck we were doing, especially when they had us walking down and back a long hallway 3 times. Thankfully, me and the rest of the accounting graduates were all really close, so we just all cracked jokes and said stupid shit during this time to cheer each other up, but eventually, we reached the arena and we were seated, where commencement officially began. Commencement started with the introductions, where Chancellor introduced us and talked about school history and stuff that me and everyone else already knew. Then she talked about the class of 2024. We were apparently the largest graduating class in UNC Charlotte's history, as there were over 5,000 of us graduates. We also represented 36 states and I think 15 countries. However, the really cool part is the age range. The entire graduating class ranged from ages 19 to 72, making me officially the youngest graduate of UNC Charlotte's class of 2024, which is so cool to think about, especially with this being a record-breaking graduating class. Our chancellor then introduced the guest speakers, and they gave their speeches. However, it was during this time when my lack of sleep really started to hit. I was so goddamn tired and came super close to falling asleep during the speeches. Luckily, I stayed awake, as shortly later, it was time to introduce all of us graduates. So they took my line and we walked around the arena and got behind the stage. My intermediate counting 1 and 2 professor was there helping us out, so I got to see her again too. And then they started calling names. I was the 10th person to be called, so when they called my name, I walked the stage while my family cheered me on. I shook one of the guest speakers' hand, and then I sat back down, where I then had about 2 hours to kill while everyone else went on stage. I mostly spent this time on my phone looking at memes, anime girls, and occasionally texting my sister, hoping that I wouldn't fall asleep. I also cheered on some friends and even a 2D as their names were called. Once everyone was called, the student body president came up on stage and guided us in the turning of our tassels. When we did it, immediately a huge shot of confetti shot up directly in front of me that not only scared the ever-living fuck out of me and fully woke me up, but also marked the end of commencement. We all cheered and were led outside to the courtyard between the College of Education and College of Health. I then found my parents, sister, 2 aunts, and 2 grandmothers, where we took some pictures. Afterwards, we moved my stuff out of my dorm and officially headed out, marking the very end of my time at UNC Charlotte. So yeah, that's commencement. While long and tiring, especially given my lack of sleep, it was at least a nice way to officially put an end to my time at UNC Charlotte and celebrate my accomplishments over my 5 semesters and 2 summers, as I achieved a shit ton of stuff. From graduating with 151 credit hours, the equivalent of a master's degree at just 19 years old, to other things such as writing and publishing a book, gaining a better worldview and in-depth knowledge of accounting, economics, and business, making lots of amazing friends, and helping fellow Niners as a peer tutor for 7 classes. I did a ton as a UNC Charlotte undergraduate student that I'll happily look back on for the rest of my life. That then brings me to the next chapter of my life, being my young adult white-collared working life. In simpler terms, my future plans. Now, I can make an entire story time on future plans, as I have an absolute ton of future plans, some of which are not going to be fulfilled for another 15 years that I'm actually working towards today. However, because the future can absolutely vary and be much different than what I anticipate, I'm going to stick to my plans for the near future. Let's start with the summer. So earlier this year, Dad was able to get me a supply chain management internship at his company. I started working here last week, and here, I basically help with the purchasing team out with gathering data on suppliers. It's a cool job that I think will have a lot of great benefits for me, especially with regards to office culture and communication, since I did not do an internship while in college. Now, this internship will go until around mid-August, as in early September, I'll be starting a tax accounting full-time job at a public accounting firm in Charlotte. Here, I'll be working on tax returns for corporations and high-net-worth individuals. I'm planning to move into an apartment in Charlotte in August, which I'll be financing with the money I'm saving from the summer internship to afford it alongside some furniture and other apartment necessities. I'm very excited about starting this position, which I landed back in September of 2023 after meeting the firm at Meet the Professionals and having a fantastic interview. I think that I'll do great things for this firm and be able to apply what I've learned at UNC Charlotte to benefit the firm. I'm also excited about living on my own, as I'll be 100% independent and on my own. While I experienced this somewhat in college, I was still quite reliant on my parents' support. But once I move into my own apartment, I'll officially be on my own support. And I think that this will be great, since the only ones I'll have to support are me and my cat, who I'm also bringing with me since my parents want to get a dog. I think this will be a great experience for me. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I have more long-term plans as well, even some 15 years out in the future. However, I am going to keep these private, since not only are they more personal in nature, but they also might change. For example, I currently anticipate myself being single for the rest of my life, as I've actually based quite a few of those long-term plans on that factor. However, in the long run, things can change, as maybe I will meet a woman and get married and even have kids if that's what me and my future wife wants. So as fun as it is to look way into the future, it would not be wise to state those plans here since those things can change. But maybe as we enter the long run and those plans get closer and closer towards fulfillment, I'll be able to share them and do story times on them since I don't anticipate ending story time anytime soon. Speaking of story times, Storytime will be changing a little bit in 2025. Since I've now graduated from college and therefore have no more story times about school to do, I'm thinking about doing 3 story times a year where I simply go over how my life has been over the past 4 months and talking about things that have happened. I'll do other story times similar to what I've been doing, but I think this would be a good replacement for the school and college story times, as when I started this series back when I was in the 11th grade, I did not anticipate myself doing this series 3.5 years later. And with that officially wraps up the story time. Thank you all for watching the story time as well as supporting me and my channel over the 8 years I've been doing it. It's been incredible to look back on now that I'm officially an adult and a college graduate, despite it feeling like yesterday that I was a rising 7th grader in 2016, making good old